It is evening from Nairobi, Kenya. My name is John Wamwara. I was supposed to be there, but unfortunately I couldn't make it. My only promise is that for the 5th World Conference on Constitutional Justice, I'll do everything to attend. Now today I want to ask us to relook the different government models that we have in our world. And that's why I want to ask us to look at constitutionalism, liberal democracy, and populism. I also want us to critically appraise them, even as we also appraise and rebuke an elitist liberal culture that has contributed to the current wave of populism in our world. Now, it is up to us, it's given to us to organize our societies. And quoting John Rawls in our theory of justice, he says, while we are at it, organizing our world, we must ensure that social and economic inequalities are arranged so that they are both to the greatest expected benefit of the least advantaged, and number two, that they attach to the offices and the positions open to all under the conditions of fair equality of opportunity. Unfortunately, oftentimes, the different models that have attended liberal democracies our world over have not been open to, at least alive to, creating social justice, dealing with social injustices, and that has contributed to the current wave of populist movements. Now, I will give us a bit of an introduction to liberal democracy, constitutionalism, and populism. And then I will give a historical overview of populist waves and how they relate to the current waves of populism. And finally, I will look at suggest ways through which you could combat the current wave of populism. Now, if you look the world over, you will realize that there is explosion of knowledge everywhere. People are more informed, people are more struggled, people ought to be more versatile. But instead, what we see is protectionist and populist nationalism that are emerging as the dominant political thought and movement. We all not remember, I don't know, the Trump's election in 2016 that shocked most parts of the world, but about the populist threat experienced in France and Netherlands that almost had its way. And today, of course, alive to this fact is Brexit, its failures, and not just the last month, the election of Boris Johnson as the British Prime Minister. Now, but what is liberal democracy or constitutionalism? Well, I borrow from Professor Benjamin Radcliffe's definition, where he says that liberal democracy is a system for making collective decisions in which political authority is vested in individuals who are chosen by citizens in a competitive fashion for limited tenures via the institutionalization of voting schemes. And therefore, liberal democracy or constitutionalism will say that all government is limited and every person is inviolable. It also upholds the principle of justice that denies that the loss of freedom for some is made right by the greater shared good by others. And it has also not allowed that the sacrifice imposed on a few are outweighed by the larger sum of the advantages enjoyed by many. That is still John Rawls' theory of justice. Now, the reason, fairness, the rule of law, and justice are the attendant principles of liberal democracy or constitutionalism. The primacy of justice, and that each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice, that even the welfare of the society cannot override. What is populism then? And I will quote from Pippa Norris from Harvard Kennedy School, and he says that populism is a philosophy of governance in holding that legitimate political authority is based on vox populi, the voice of the people, and majority rule. without safeguards for the minority rights and conventional checks and balances. Populism gives leaders the chance to grab sweeping powers by claiming to speak for the people, and they use those claims to sweep away constitutional safeguards on the executive power. Basically, generally, and there are generally two characteristics of populist leaders. One, we have the populist authoritarians, and the number two, populist progressives. But irrespective of who they are, you will realize that both of them, if we are to compare liberal democracy and populism, we would say that, of course, they both are ruled by the majority. Liberal democracy provides for checks and balances on power, while populist regimes remove these boundaries, in fact, oftentimes obliterating them. Liberal democracy executes the will of the majority while protecting the interests of the minority, while populist regimes often execute the will of the leader, disguised as the voice of the people, while demonizing the minority and as the undesirable other needing no protection of the law. Liberal democracy is often based on justice and an end in itself, while populist regimes found their actions on the principles of utility, which is the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Now, we've had liberal waves of populism historically, and many times populist leaders over the centuries have generated legitimacy and support by mobilizing marginalized social sectors into a publicly visible and contentious political action, while articulating anti-elitist, nationalistic rhetoric that valorizes the people. As it has happened in the past, so also is it happening in the 21st century in our world today. Now, but then my problem with the populism, at least my thought on what populism is and its dangers, is not different so much from the elitism, liberal elitism that attend liberal culture. For example, elites have an emphasis on personal pursuits for private gains. On the other hand, populists understand social inequalities and choose to exploit it. Elites believe often that the security of money would protect them from the adversities of the times. Populists, on the other hand, they know that the political power is largely with disgruntled masses. While elites have desired the pride of place at the expense of societal interest, populists wish to have the privilege of elites and are ready to exploit the masses to get it. While elites have exploited the masses without end, believing that they can keep them in check. The populists do not care for systems and they are ready to dismantle it, to reform it in the manner that facilitates their interests. And finally, the elites have fostered and jealously protected the privilege that private property promises and in fact provides. Populists, on the other hand, are willing to do everything to overhaul the system in their favor. And that's why I say, just as we are, I am speaking against populism, so also do I also speak against liberal elitism that has seen our world and most people disenfranchised. Now, there is need for us to combat populism for a few reasons. One, let us look at the history of where they took us. Where did Italian fascism lead us? Where did German nationalism lead us? Where did the Japanese nationalism and aggression in the Far East lead us? Where did the Hutu power movement and the Rwandan that led to the Rwandan genocide lead us? We must combat populism because it regards primacy of justice. It treats individuals as expendable to the Commonwealth, and it makes irresponsible promises of restoration of what is illusionary and impossible. In fact, it has led in the past to destruction, death, and genocide. And I am convinced that the current wave will certainly lead us to those ends. And finally, populism undermines democratic principles and gains, and undermines democratic principles and gains that are acceptable, at least for now. Now, there are three suggestions that I have made regarding how we can ensure that we deal with populism, or at least combat populism. One is through what has been called lack egalitarianism. And this is what it says. We find ourselves in certain situations that are not out of our own choice. And whenever that happens, the question is, the societies must come up with ways to address such lack. It will ensure that those who are disadvantaged will be addressed. Those who are in need of the support of the society will be taken care of. Number two, I have said that active ideological militancy is required in favor of spreading the ideals of liberal democracy. We must realize that the liberal democracy has created a marketplace of ideas, and it must, and I repeat, it must also engage. It must bring its wares to the market and engage actively in expounding its ideas. Populism are doing, the populists are doing it everywhere, wherever you go, and they don't care. We must also realize that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the war of ideas didn't stop, but rather it was the beginning of Berlin. And then finally, I want to say that it is possible to create an all-encompassing global we. We must come up with a definition of us, a definition of our nationhood, a definition of citizenry that accepts everyone. Because you remember that nations are not, as David Lighting says, nations are not out there to be counted. They are a function of the social, political, and economic processes, most of which has occurred recently. And therefore, despite the widespread use of the misnomer of nation state, almost no state is made up of a single nation in the ethnic sense. We must understand that every nation and state are human creations. We can therefore define them in a manner that is tolerant and accepting of the otherness of others. Let me conclude by quoting Mahatma Gandhi, and this is what he says. The things that we would destroy as are politics without principle, pleasure without conscience, wealth without work, knowledge without character, business without morality, science without humanity, and worship without sacrifice. And to this list I wish to add power without duty, governance without the rule of law, and influence without facts. This is the kind of world that populism and the populist waves and movements are building, and we must do everything to counter the wave in favor of the ideals of liberal democracy. Thank you.